Welcome to Cigar City Radio, episode number 4. I'm your host, Randy Ojeda, and making the magic happen, Mr. Jason Solanas.
I'm back.
Oh, and we're never going away. Over the last few weeks, we've received a number of questions and comments from listeners. So to collect those in an easy place for us to check and respond, we've actually set up an email address, which is pretty simple. It's cigarcityradio@gmail.com. So any questions that you have, any comments, concerns, anything you'd like to know about our show, please use the email address cigarcityradio@gmail.com. Also note that this is not an email for show booking or for anything related to our Cigar City management business. So don't start emailing us trying to get signed through Cigar City Radio. This is strictly for listeners and people that have questions. We'd love to read some of those questions on the air, and we'd love to hear from you. So please email us.
We'd like to let you know about a new single and music video by LA psych band Send Medicine. It's titled Translucent and might just be their catchiest song to date. With a pop hook and a groovy guitar lick that will never get out of your head, you'll find yourself listening to it on repeat, like myself. You can find Translucent by Send Medicine on Spotify and Apple Music, and watch the music video on YouTube. For everything else, go to sendmedicineband.com.
For this episode, we left our home court of Ybor City for a road trip to Old Seminole Heights, where we were given a tour of the home studio of Matt Reisinger, also known as electronic artist FR33DBACK. If you've been around a minute, you might also know Matt from the Tampa-based pop-punk band Select Start. Matt is also the host of the hilarious Face It podcast with fellow Select Start members Patrick Geyer and Joe Guerra. So check that out, Jason. Another podcast from Tampa.
Hell yeah, and it's good.
It's really good, and it sounds really good because his studio is amazing. It was great to be there. There are just so many synths, so many Apple products, and a tiny dog named Felix. FR33DBACK's the real deal. He's only played live a few times, but it's an incredible performance with a mind-boggling electronic setup. His new album, Math Math, will be out this Friday, November 4th. He's got some shows coming up in the Tampa, Sarasota area. So for more info and links to all of his social medias, head to FR33DBACK.com, FR33DBACK.com. So here it is, episode number 4. We can just call you FR33DBACK, right?
Cool. Yeah, that works.
Yeah, FR33DBACK is the new project you're working on, electronic music. We actually had the pleasure of catching your show, what was it, a couple weeks ago at the Crowbar?
Yeah.
You opened for Chrome Sparks.
Yeah.
And it was amazing for me to go in because I was expecting to see a guy press play on his computer and then, kind of throw his fists up in the air and do that whole thing. Yeah. But then I saw you had this insane setup on the floor with like a lot of things that we're actually surrounded by now here in your studio.
Yeah.
It's like you almost took this studio with you and set it up on stage.
Right. Yeah. I tried to. Like the first show I ever had was in April, I think, with this project, this FR33DBACK thing. And I literally was like, okay, how can I bring everything I have with me and make it like something I could set up in a day and like actually sound check everything and make sure it worked. And I literally brought everything I had besides like my desk.
Okay.
And it took a day to set up, like a physical day, because it was just me plugging in wires and figuring out things and how I wanted to route it. And I would reroute things because I was like, that's not right. I want to maybe do this, make some efficiencies. And then it literally was just a sea of cords and wires and everything on stage. Luckily, I didn't have like other acts that had equipment. It was just like rappers and things like that. So they could literally just kind of come in and be in the front of it.
Wow.
So I didn't have to move anything around. So then after that, I was like, okay, I gotta break it down a little bit more because I want to be able to like actually play a show with like other bands that I have to
Right.
like kind of get on and off, and how quickly can I? So I scaled it down to like my favorite pieces now. So like that Chrome Spark show, I had like all of my favorite synths, and it's pretty broken down. I can set it up and break it down. I hire a tech that kind of comes out, but he and I can set up and break down in 20 minutes. So
Wow,
that's not too bad.
yeah, that's impressive. Yeah, we couldn't even break this down in 20 minutes, I don't think.
Yeah, sorry in advance.
That's okay. No, I totally understand.
I think that's what's amazing to me is that it's live electronic music. You know,
Yeah.
it's like you're actually really recreating the songs, you're just using a whole ton of electronics. You know?
Yeah, I mean, I want to be able to play music live. I mean, I think that's important. I think everyone who plays music doesn't want to just kind of play recordings of their music for people and like just watch them as they listen. I mean, that's cool if you're like in the car with your friends, but
Yeah.
if you're playing in front of an audience, okay, here's my performance.
Right.
And I'm so much more comfortable playing live electronics than I am even DJing. Like I have turntable, like a little like DDJ turntable thing that I use once in a while, but like it's really more of a hobby. Like I'm not a DJ turntablist or like even a good DJ for a party, and I'll pick a song, transition, whatever. Live electronics, synthesizers, anything with knobs and switches and that I can plug into each other and have them all kind of talking at the same time. I find I become kind of more of a conductor of an electronic band than an actual musician.
Yeah. You're controlling the machine.
Yeah, the machines, I'm telling the machines, hey, would you like to play this song? And they're like, we'll see. You know, they just kind of do their own thing. And we kind of find I'm pushing and they're pulling, kind of. It's interesting. It literally feels like if you get enough machines together, the complexity is such that it starts to become alive. Like you cannot find the ghost in the shell anymore. It's literally just like, that's alive. Like my system is alive and I'm talking to a poltergeist in this machine. It's telling me things that I didn't think it would. So then I use that to my advantage when I go out and play. I'm like, hey, here's my poltergeist machine. I'll just turn it on and you guys listen and we'll kind of have a conversation on stage. That's basically what happens.
That's wild.
Yeah.
That's so crazy.
Thanks.
I've just never seen anybody do something like that.
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of artists. I mean, I certainly am not the first one to do this.
Sure, yeah.
There are a lot of artists that I will find are just extremely talented live improvisational electronic artists. Names that come to mind, like there's this guy named Daedalus who's like insane, and he has very minimal gear on stage, but it's all max MSP, and he's using like a monome, which is sort of a push button device, kind of like a launch pad for Ableton, but it's like many more buttons, and it has looping capabilities and all sorts of crazy interactions. It's just basically him and that on stage, and it literally looks like, I can't even describe it to you. He dresses in like 1800s coattail, like the piano coattail thing. Like he looks like somebody from like an Ichabod Crane kind of a guy.
Okay.
Like he has the bushy sideburns and everything else, and he literally just looks like a mad scientist on stage. So guys like that, or you know, like Daft Punk, for instance, they play live. They have tracks because, of course, they've recorded albums and they have samples from albums or whatever. But if you look at the inside of their spaceship, it's lemur screens and like iPad surfaces that they have pre-programmed themselves to like adjust like it's an actual spaceship.
It does look a little bit like the Starship Enterprise.
Yeah,
right?
it basically is.
I love that too, and I'd love to see more of that. You know, I'm not as hip into the electronic world. It's something I'm exploring now. I feel like.
Follow me on Instagram. And all the other social medias.
All the social medias.
I'll likely post something about synthesizer culture, probably. And, you know, I have so many artists that, you know, I enjoy on Spotify and SoundCloud and, you know, wherever, that really just have those, like, crazy electronic styles that, like, you wouldn't think of right off. Like, it's not really what Skrillex is doing. It's not really what some other huge DJ like David Guetta or something.
Right.
It's like a whole nother subculture of like actual synthesizer musicians.
Yeah. I mean, that's definitely in this room. There are, I'm counting 1, 2, 4,
yeah, I mean,
5 synths.
Basically, if you look, anything that you look at is kind of a synth. Like this is a synth. That there is a drum synth.
Listeners, he is pointing at a drum synth.
Yeah, something that looks like a Super Nintendo controller.
That up there is a synth. That's a theremin.
Yeah,
which
I
is
love
like
the theremin.
The most basic of synthesizers.
Actually took a class at USF
Yeah.
where I built a theremin.
Did you really?
Yeah, it was an electronic music class.
That's amazing.
Yeah, it was
Yeah.
fun. It was like a very basic thing, but
I mean,
it worked.
It's such a simple circuit. Like that circuit created electronic music. If that circuit hadn't existed the way it did, it wouldn't be the way that it is now. Like, I think it was in the 40s, maybe early, like 30s or 40s. The guy who invented that thing was like a radio engineer, and he was working for like the Russian government making radio instruments, and he accidentally plugged two antennas into each other in a way, and it made a noise essentially. He was like, "Oh my god, what was that?" So then he was able to connect it to a speaker, and then the way these two antenna interfere with each other is the sound that is created. So it's a mad concept if you understand anything about like the basics of physics, like electromagnetism, stuff like that. It's literally just using electromagnetism to make noise. It's crazy.
And if you want to see what this kind of shit looks like, it's FR33DBACK on Instagram.
Yeah, like free feedback as if one word.
Right.
And then I want people to be able to find it on Google, so I replace the E's with threes.
Okay.
And it's also kind of like a nod to like the old hacker culture, because I used to pretend like I was a hacker kid, like I was on IRC, and I thought I was a hacker, but it literally was not. It was all an act.
That's where feedback comes from.
Names are so hard to come up with. I think I was in a band a while ago, and it was a name. The name of the band was Select Start, and that name came about before. I wasn't the one to choose it.
Yeah.
It was a name that existed, and it kind of made sense for the time. Like, we were all Nintendo kids, and like it resonated in some way.
I actually remember. I think it was before you were in the band, but I remember. I think I got it on purevolume.com.
Right.
It was the first Select Start single, if I recall. It was called Nintendo Nation.
I think so. Yeah.
And it was just like 3-chord punk, but it was cool. It gripped me at the time, as a mall rat type kid.
I was definitely into it too. Yeah. I heard it as a fan, and I was like, oh, this is cool. Like, I'm totally into this. And the name made sense, but the later we came in years as we were doing the band, we were basically like, I don't know if this name really represents us anymore. Like, should we just change it? Like you listen to the band like the Get Up Kids or something like that. Like, it's a name that doesn't really seem to at all make sense with their style.
Yeah.
So Freedback was kind of me thinking, okay, at first I was like, I'm just going to make music and not get paid for it. I had other jobs. I was doing like sound production for TV and radio commercials and stuff like that. And that was kind of the paying the bills. And that still is. I mean, it's kind of my main gig.
Sure.
But I was like, okay, I want to make music. That's just me. And it's not really for profit in a way. It's just like, what can I do without any creative feedback from a client? I'm so used to working on like, oh, you're working on this TV spot and it's got to be this kind of style and it's got to be this length and it's got to turn here and, which scratches one itch. But there's this whole other side that's like the soundscape is endless. So it's like there's 95% of the sounds that I want to make that I can't for this commercial that's like a grocery store, which is like a glockenspiel and a banjo or something. So yeah, it was kind of like, okay, I want to make it for free. So it was like free. And then I like the idea of it being a kind of a conjoined word. And I like the idea. At first, I was going to call it feedback loop because I was like, oh, feedback loop. I like that. Like, it's a physics term. It literally is most of what I do.
Right.
Like,
It's very representative.
Representative. All of the instruments have the ability to have feedback loops, and then them to myself. So, like, our relationship, mine and the machines, is kind of this feedback loop that we have together. So it was like feedback loop. So that's kind of like the original title. And then I kept saying it. And then I was like, I don't know, it's too complicated because it's like feedback loop. So I was like, I made some songs and just kind of like demo songs, and I was putting them out on Bandcamp and stuff like that a year ago or so. And I was like, what should I call the album? So I was like, if I call the album Loop, then it would be Feedback, and the first album would be called Loop. So somehow I could maintain the word, but then I can just drop that, make it Feedback, and that's now the title.
There you go. And that was the first one that came out on iTunes.
Yeah, the very first one on iTunes, which it doesn't have the 3s in the name, so it's even hard to search. It's like, okay, if you're searching for my first album, the 3s are actually E's. Good luck. No, so I try not to promote it much just because of that, just because it's too hard to explain where to find it.
Yeah.
But if somebody wants to listen to it, I'll send them a link. And it was kind of the first thing that I wanted to do was just make music, and it was literally 4 songs that I made in one night, I think. The first take of everything was basically what I recorded.
Wow.
And it was just like the very first track is just vocals for like a minute of the song.
Yeah.
And it's just me singing, and then I loop it, and that's again feedback loop or whatever. So then it was just loop of that, and then I'd sing on top of that, and I'd sing on top of that one. And then so I basically do 6 layers of a vocal, and they'd all be kind of warping in and out, and 3 triad chords, but then there'd be other phrasings and stuff like that. Once I had the 6 of those, then I would start adding in the synthesizers and seeing where that would take the song.
Right.
And then I would just basically figure out things as I was looping it. I would never stop looping it. I'd just be like, okay, I'm going to add a synthesizer in. And then it was like, I don't like that. Take it out. And it was still loop. Never stop. Start singing vocals. I was like, okay, cool. Adding. So then I made just like these loops, essentially, 4 different loops. That then I was like, okay, I want to make an album out of that. So in Ableton, you literally can just open up a song, which is all these loops, and then just hit record, and now you have the arrangement view where you're like, okay, I'm going to play these loops in order of how they should start and end.
Okay.
Like, should the song be vocals first or synth first, or what should the peaks and valleys be? So I'll just play them all live as if I had a band in front of me and I was orchestrating them to play with all these vocal samples and such, and then just record that and put it online.
So with Ableton, like you sort of just build the arrangement as you go.
Yeah,
Like,
I mean, Ableton is so open in its functionality to like any way you want to work, and that's really probably the reason I use it.
yeah. I've heard a lot of electronic artists are using that as opposed to Pro Tools or Logic or something.
It's amazing. I mean, I've used every program for years. I mean, I've been doing this kind of professionally for about 15, 16 years, and I started with like Pro Tools at first, very, very first, which, has its own downfalls in some ways, but it is amazing. And I still use it to this day, in mixing. And then I used Cubase, and then I used Logic, and then I used Reason, Nuendo. I just tried them all.
Sure. Why not?
Yeah. And Reason was really cool. Reason, I think, is probably, if I didn't use Ableton, I would probably use Reason, because it is a very, like, synthesizer type of program. Like, when you look at it, it's a rack of devices that have, like, physical digital patch cords going from like the inputs to the outputs, going from this to that, whatever, anything you wanted to do. So you could actually learn how to patch a device.
Yeah,
so it was kind of like, it was a nice digital representation of having a real studio with real gear. And then Ableton was like, okay, it's not going to look at all like real gear. It's actually just going to look like, really basic shapes.
Yeah, something from the future.
Something from the future, right. And the idea of making loops kind of like the central focus was just kind of interesting to me. At first, I didn't understand it really, because I'm such a left to right timeline kind of a...
Yeah, I mean, that's how most music is written. You play the song beginning to end.
Right. Yeah, so it was weird at first, but then once I got it, I was like, yeah, this is it. If I'm going to ever make music, it's going to be in there. And if I don't want to make it loop music, I can always just press tab, and now you have a left to right arrangement view, which you can do every other kind of recording and go back and forth. So I'm like, I'm gonna record a whole song in the standard way to do a song. Okay, cool. Hit tab, shift tab, so you can grab everything, bring it over. And now it's like, okay, I want 8 bars of this to be a loop here. I want the next 8 bars to be a loop. 4, boom, boom, break it all up into all these pieces. And then you can play the song live. And that's essentially what the building blocks of a live show for my music is. It's just all these stems of things that I've recorded or live synthesizers on stage that are being performed by the MIDI that is inside of those tracks. So like the computer is playing it like a player piano essentially on stage, and my job is then to just twiddle the knobs and make sure that the sound is where it should be.
Now it makes even more sense when you describe it as orchestrating, because you're basically, you have this bank of sound and stuff, and you can just throw it out.
Play, like once you have a bunch of songs, now you have one master session. So it's not like every song I'm like, okay, thank you guys, open up a new session, wait 5 seconds, play. It's more like the session has 20, 30 songs in it that are all some area of being finished. Could be just one quick little 8-bar thing that I thought about, and it's a couple cents here or there. Could be a full song, whatever. And then I can just kind of pick and choose. Okay, I like the kick drum from this song. What would happen if I put the bass drum from this song with it? And then what would happen if instead of playing the recorded bass part, I had it play that note into the Voyager? So then I can, just do some new arrangement to that piece or whatever.
Yeah.
So.
And how do you keep track of all that?
I don't know. I think it's just how my brain is wired.
Yeah.
I think I see it like seeing the Matrix. Like I understand everything about what's here because I for fun like read manuals and like take things apart and try to figure out how they fit together. And like ever since I was a kid, I was like the computer repair guy for my family and like, we got a Roku box. How the hell do you put that into a TV? And it was like, don't call a cable guy. I got this.
Yeah.
And I just kind of a unicorn.
Yeah, exactly. So it's just gear was. I really kind of gravitated towards it. My dad was like a computer programmer, and he made like computer games on like floppy disks back in the day.
Yeah.
And so we had computers in the house, like not just one, like
a lot of
servers worth of computers in like the garage. So like I would get one of the computers that were about to be like phased out, and it would just be in my room. So I was like, I was like playing, Oregon Trail and stuff like that myself, not having to like go to school and like wait my turn.
Yeah.
It was like I had that copy of that at home.
Right.
Which I think is super important. Getting the young next generation of people things as quickly as possible that they're going to have to use in the future is like paramount. Like I know that's weird for parents to advocate like put an iPad in front of your kid and just like never take it away. Because like honestly, there is something to that. And it's not that, it's going to make the kid just like, have less of an attention span. It's everyone's going to have less of an attention span. That's just the way of the world.
He won't be the only person.
He won't be the only person. Yeah. He will have already kind of, made the beginnings of his brain connect in the way that the next generation should.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like you can't stifle that next, like VR, for instance. If I put on a VR helmet, I'm going to get sick, at some point because my brain just doesn't get it. I'm 32 years old. I have no idea how my vestibular system is not going to go like, oh yeah, you're walking on this trail. It's going to go, no, this isn't right. Like, let's throw up together. And like, that's not great, but that's my physiology. That's where my brain's at now. But if you're a baby and you have a VR helmet on,
right,
and you're perceiving the world through that process, your brain isn't going to think that's weird. It's going to be like, oh, yeah, this is just what we do. So now this kid can literally live in a VR world like in The Matrix. And it's actually kind of nice.
I guess. I don't know. But I guess it's kind of like, where we can type well. And like my parents cannot type well.
Exactly.
And
all
that's
because
just
we took the classes.
Yeah, and that's because we were given computers from a very, very young age.
Exactly.
I can play Doom really well.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Same.
Yeah, no, like I have some friends, some like older friends who will just never play, like they love video games, but will just never play a first-person shooter because they can't make the jump to be able to control your vision and movement at the same time.
The twitchiness it takes, I mean, you really got to be quick, especially, you're playing other people, especially nowadays online, that do this all the time. So their brains are like, and they're fairly young normally.
Yeah.
So yeah, you'll be lucky if you win multiplayer games nowadays unless you play all the time or you're really young. But when we were a kid, it was like LAN parties and stuff. So just like me and my buddies, like all in the house that were like, I know I'm better than these four guys. Like we've played, we've played Halo 2 enough to know, you know what I mean, or whatever. Like,
I'm just curious about what skills are going to go hand in hand with what the kids are doing now, like growing up with an iPad and growing up with that stuff, because playing video games has given us skills that we didn't expect, like being able to drive and text.
Sure.
not that that's good, but
we're not advocating. Do not drive.
Yeah,
please,
don't drive
people.
and text, but people are able to do that. Not that it's safe.
Yeah.
Usually these skills come hand in hand with something else. So what is VR going to come hand in hand with? What thing outside of VR is it going to improve for these people?
That's a great question. I don't know yet, because that's kind of the weird thing about the future, right? It's like technological growth is moving so quickly now. For you math nerds out there, like the exponential curve, right? Like when you look at an exponential graph, the first bit of it, there's no change. It's literally just like 0, 0.1, 0.2, 0.4. But then it's like 0.5, and then 5, and then 20, and then 30. It just it expands so quickly that before you know it, you've doubled to infinity.
Yeah. In other words, it's know your logarithms, kids.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, and learn to code.
Yeah, right. It's really important. I mean, I don't know if you'll really need to know like the math of it too much anymore, because it can get really complicated, and like all these new code languages are basically just like built on the backs of other code. So you don't need to know like the nitty gritty of it. You can just type in like video, enter, and then it's like now you have a video patch that would have taken a year to figure out, you know?
Right.
And that's somewhere online for free.
Yeah.
So it's not necessarily you need the math, but you need to understand how things work, how signals travel, I/O gates, and like if you can figure out what a circuit does, you can figure out what a computer does just on its basic functionality. Like you can figure out a lot of things.
Yeah. I noticed that you have a lot of is it Moog or Moog? What is the official pronunciation?
We got into this in the car on the way here.
It happens with a lot of, I mean, it's a hot topic for sure. I have been a fan of the company for a long time. I've known people to say it every way.
Okay.
I say it Moog.
Moog.
Yes. And the reason I say it that way is that's the general pronunciation for like North American dialects. Like Moog is just what it would be because it's a guy's last name, Robert Moog. He calls himself that. His family calls themselves that. And it's I think a Dutch word or something like that. So like originally it was Moch.
Yeah.
So like he doesn't say it that way.
It's like a Skyrim shout.
Exactly. Yeah. Right. It really is. And then for the British fans of the Moog synthesizer, it's almost ubiquitously Moog because that's just kind of how the Brits say it.
Right.
So if you say it that way, it's not wrong. It's just like that's kind of the English dialect. It's kind of like saying like if I was to write the word color and put a U, like O-U-R at the end. Yeah. If I was writing it, it'd be like, why is he like? Are you from England? Like, why would you say it like that?
What are you driving a fucking loo?
Yeah, right. Exactly. So yeah, Moog is how I would ask people to say
Moog. So you're sponsored by Moog, but I feel like it's more than just you take a picture and post it on Instagram and you tag Moog. It's like you really like all of your gear here for the most part is Moog. It seems like and you're a really big advocate for the brand in general.
Yeah, it was one of those brands that, like Nike is to some kids, where like they will buy every sneaker, and that's just because it resonated with them,
Yeah.
The Moog synthesizer was like kind of what got me into music in a sense. Like I had played the bass guitar because my friends when we were young was like, I'm gonna play the bass because that's the instrument that I would be good at, and I've never picked it up before. It was just kind of a social game, and it was cool, and I liked the instrument a lot. But then I didn't really get infatuated with music until I understood the synthesizer. And the first synthesizer I ever heard in person was the Moog Prodigy.
Which is sitting right next to you.
Which
actually.
I have one. I didn't own one at the time. It was like I was in a ska band, I played bass, and we were like, we want a Moog, and I didn't know it was even Moog. I thought it was just I said a synth.
Right.
I didn't know what that meant. It was like a synth. At that time, I didn't really know the difference between a keyboard and a synth.
Yeah.
And this guy was like, oh, I got one. I'll bring it. And he brought this like wooden box with keys on it, and I was like, okay, this is new to me. Like I was fairly young. I was like 13 or something. I don't know. I was pretty young. And he brought it over to the practice space and he plugged it in, and just pressing a note and turning a knob, and it made a sound I'd never really thought of before in a sense. It didn't sound like anything I'd heard. So I was like, yeah, that's awesome. I love that. So then I just kind of wanted to know more and more about the instrument. And then I found that all the history about it. It's basically like the first synthesizer company ever. Like it predates mostly everything. Like the term synthesizer was coined by the engineers of the synth, and it was like a local or an American company from New York at the time, super small. Started from a guy who like was building theremins, and like he just was like, oh, let's plug these boxes together of circuits and see what happens. And that was like the modular synthesizer. So you see like a room with synths, that was one of the original ones, was the Moog modular. So then I started playing more and more, and I bought any synth I could afford. I at the time I definitely couldn't afford a Moog, so I had like soft synths, and I had the Alesis Micron, and like, all these just random cheap Guitar Center synthesizers. And then when I can afford my first synth, I got a Moog, Little Fatty, and
great name for a synthesizer.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. It's PH.
yeah, of course.
So I got the Little Fatty, and it's a cool synth. Really fun. And I was in a band at the time, Select Start, and I was touring with the band with the synthesizer. And at the time, MySpace was huge, and that's kind of like where our band resonated most online at the time. It's kind of what got us to where we were. So there was a Moog MySpace account, which had pictures of artists and their like albums. And I had these pictures, so I was like, oh, messaged him like, here's some photos if you want to put them on your thing. Like, I'm a Moog player. Not sure how to say it.
Yeah,
I'm a Moog guy.
You're a Moog tapper and Turner. Yeah.
Mogist.
Yeah.
And this guy named Jason wrote me back, and he was like the sales and marketing guy from Moog. And at the time, there wasn't really social media, so they didn't like have interns to like maintain their social media. So it was like the guy who like dealt with artists essentially was the guy who I sent these artist photos to. And nicest guy you'd ever meet. We corresponded a bunch online. As I toured, I would like go through. Now they're located in Asheville, North Carolina. So we tour through Asheville, and I'd be like, "Can I stop by the factory?" And they're like, "Yeah, come on over." And it literally is like Willy Wonka's factory. It's like you go in
for
synthesizers. Yeah, literally, it's like it's synths everywhere the eyes can see. There's like workers sitting with devices and headphones and oscilloscopes. Just slightly calibrating things. There's a whole rack of like 50 or 60 of the same synthesizer over and over again, like Terminator style, and they're all plugged in and on because they have to do like a burn-in kind of a thing where they're just running for like 38 hours or 48 hours straight or something. I'm not sure exactly. So I was just infatuated with the brand, and at the time, I wanted to know about sponsorships because we had like a sponsorship from Fender, and we had a couple other things. The band was getting pretty cool, but we weren't like signed. We just had basic kind of.
And this was a time in music where brands like that were much more willing to give touring bands sponsorship deals because, like you said, there wasn't that much of a social media thing going on. So
anyone that was making noise with something that they used, they were like, yeah, just here. And it wasn't like, here's some free stuff. Like, I've never had that kind of a sponsorship. I'm sure people have those sponsorships out there. It's more like, here's it at cost. You know what I mean? Right. Which, for some of these devices, is astounding, kind of how much it costs to build something. It's, barely even as much as they cost to sell it. Yeah, so basically, I was asking about sponsorships, and, Jason was very kind to say, we don't really... We don't do that too often. Like, we have some artists that do, but the roster that they had was like, Madonna's guy and, whoever, like the biggest bands at the time.
Right.
So I was like, okay, yeah, well, someday, whatever, that's fine. And then, we were friends still for a little while, email back and forth. He had a baby. I was like, oh, how's Gus? And we again went back and forth. And just, again, great guy. And he was just like, you know what? I think it's about time, like, we get you sponsored. And it was one of those emails I got when I was touring. And I was just like, I just couldn't believe it. Yeah, there was a contract in a PDF form, and I was like, this is real, cool. Signed that, and then I got another contract a couple years later, and I'm still currently on that contract, so hopefully when that's up, I can get another one. But yeah, I love the brand. They're all great people. They, to me, started the movement, and they continue to inspire the movement. Like, the newest synthesizers that they make are amazing, and for a while they were really priced out of a lot of consumers' hands because it takes so much money to build something of this kind of quality. But now they're doing like Eurorack gear, so like you can buy a Moog synthesizer for just a couple $100, as before it was a couple thousand, a few thousand. And it is ushered a whole new wave of kids into the family, and they're all kind of making just insane music with it.
And I feel like it fits a lot more for the type of music you're making now as opposed to Select Start.
Yeah, it does. I mean, I kind of always wanted to do something like this, but, I was an engineer who recorded a band who at the time was Select Start. And then I was like, they're like, hey, do you want to be in the band and like play and we can tour? And so I kind of joined to like be the accessory musician guy, which is so much fun. I loved it. But like, there was always a little part of me that was like, I wish it could just be me and my synths. Eventually, when it came time to actually like stop touring and get a real job and pay bills and stuff like that, I now worked in a studio, and I had a place to put my synths and a place to buy more and add more. So I could really even advocate for the brand more because now, okay, I can actually afford some of the more expensive ones, and I would love to just have a nice one that's like the flagship synthesizer from Moog and say, hey, any musician that's interested, let me know. Like, come over, play it. Like, I can teach you everything about it because I live and breathe this kind of stuff. And when I was a kid, I would have loved to like know a place that had that kind of availability, but it just didn't exist.
Yeah.
So it's kind of what I want to hope to do.
And that's what you're doing here in the studio. We're in Seminole Heights right now,
Yeah,
which is
right.
the new, I guess, is it the hip district now in Tampa?
Yeah,
Can we
Tampa-
officially say that?
Yeah, Tampa has been growing. It used to be like every 10 years it was quite different, but now it's like every year, every couple months, and I think that's pretty much everywhere. But yeah, Seminole Heights is becoming one of those places that like a lot of cool people that want to kind of build something themselves. It's like the rent's not as expensive as in the middle of downtown, and you can kind of, like I bought a house because, it was the opportunity to like not worry about my neighbors too much. If I was like butt up against somebody like in a condo, which was where I was living before, I couldn't do music in my house.
You're right.
So I bought it because I was like, well, I want a place to make music. Seminole Heights is a great place for it. It's super quiet. All of my best friends that live in the area like own cool restaurants and bars in the area too. So like,
there's a lot going on down here now.
Yeah, it's super cool. I don't think I could ever get zoned commercial where I currently live. But I would love to actually make this a place that people could stop and like, come and check out synthesizers and like make it like a storefront in a sense, like a place where I could actually advertise and not just be like some hidden secret like passage kind of a place.
Yeah.
Because I can't really have that many people over because, where do they park? It's a neighborhood.
Right. Yeah. It has to remain your secret lab for a little while.
For a little while, yeah. But the plan is to at least introduce it to like friends and kind of get them to understand what it is.
Yeah.
And also like half the house is a studio for synthesizers and the other half is like a bar. And that's kind of the other side of what I am hoping to be a part of as well, is like my girlfriend's in the bar culture and she's awesome and she has her thing so that she can kind of be the drinks to like the music and then have like a drinks music night where people come over and just like jam on synthesizers and drink cocktails.
When you do that, please invite us.
Like, we will.
It sounds like a really good time. And this is a really cool place, man.
Thanks, man.
Thank you for having us here at your place to talk music. So before we go, I wanted to just ask you, so you do have a new record coming out, right?
Yeah, I do. So there's a record I produced and it's 6 tracks. And I recorded everything here and mixed it here and had it mastered at a studio called Earth Sound Recordings in Valdosta, Georgia, by one of my best friends in the world, Lee Dias. He is an amazing engineer. And I worked with him. Almost all the Select Start recordings that ever existed was at his studio.
Right on.
Great guy. And so I wanted somebody that I could trust with the masters. And I didn't really want to just find a mastering engineer that like, a mastering engineer to the stars, and then it would just be like, oh yeah, I'll just turn it out, whatever. Here's, give me your money.
And you recorded this to tape, though, right?
Yeah. So the studio itself is sort of a hybrid studio. So I have a Universal Audio Apollo system. That's my like digital interface, so I can record into Pro Tools and out of Pro Tools or into Ableton and out of Ableton. So I multi-tracked it essentially in Ableton on my computer, and then once I was ready to mix down, essentially, I mixed it down to tape. So it's basically, in the old days, you'd have a multi-track tape recorder, like 16-channel or 24-channel, and then a 2-track. And when you have all your faders up, you hit play on the 16-track, and then it goes from left to right, and you're mixing with your fingers to this 2-track tape, which is recording. And then once that's done, now you have a stereo image of your recordings, and that's what I did. So yeah, this is an analog tape mix.
Wow.
That analog tape electronic music.
Yeah,
mix.
right. Exactly. Yeah. And it sounds so much better in ways I can't even describe to you. Like I before you guys leave, I'll probably just put it on and let you hear it just in the room because it doesn't even sound like it's insane. I can't even describe it.
Well, yeah, let's do it. When can we expect the new record?
So yeah, new record. The plan is to put it out probably November 4th, I think. That was what I had in mind. I mean, it's going to be online soon. I'm guessing that the 4th. But yeah, you can follow me at freedback.com, which is FR33DBACK.com. And I'm going to have more shows. I have 2 more shows this year that I haven't announced yet, but they're booked and all ready to go. And so yeah, check the website for that.
Definitely.
Yeah, and also I was going to say I got a plug of another podcast.
We didn't even talk about your podcast.
Yeah, I mean we don't have to. Trust me. You guys can figure it out. Me and 2 of the guys from Select Start have a podcast where we talk about Facebook, and my position is I am kind of bothered by most things on Facebook, especially the things that are shared incessantly. To me, there's a lot of noise.
Yeah.
And one of the guys on the other show, Joe, he loves it. It's like he loves how crazy these things can get, and we argue for 20 minutes about it every week. And we release it on Friday. It's called Face It Podcast.
All right.
So yeah, faceitpodcast.com. I think we're on the podcast app on your phones.
Yeah.
You can look at it.
So definitely, check out the Face It podcast. There should be more quality podcasts coming out of Tampa.
I was thinking the same thing.
Yeah.
Like when I heard your guys' podcast, I listened to Junior Boy's one, and it was literally just, you guys posted it on Facebook. I was like, cool, another podcast.
Yeah.
And it sounded good, and I was like, oh, cool. It's like we're not the only ones. I can't think of any other podcasts in town. So if you guys know of any that I could track.
Boldly Going by Jason Soul. He does a lot of charity events and stuff like that. He has like a laundry project where he goes to other cities and
Boldly Going.
Yeah, Boldly Going is a
Sweet.
podcast, and he's an excellent person. He always has some interesting guests. So I recommend that.
Love
one.
it.
But yeah, if you have a podcast, hit us up.
Yeah.
Let's talk.
Let's like make a Facebook group.
Yeah.